Isaac Stone-Fish is a senior fellow at the Asia Society Center on U.S. China Relations, joining me now to talk more about this latest executive order. So really, the administration continues to try to basically starve the regime. Strangulation, they've called it. What's the significance of this latest order?
I think this is, just like you said, another step in that direction, and it really highlights the difference between America's strategy and China's strategy on this. China still really feels that the way to bring North Korea back to the negotiating table is through economic engagement. The U.S. very strongly feels otherwise. The U.S. has been pushing really hard to get China to sign on to its version.
But the president said there in the meeting that China's central bank has ordered all of its banks to stop doing business with North Korea, at least allowing new North Korean customers. Doesn't that show that China is starting to agree, at least in part, that there needs to be a greater economic squeeze on the regime?
So China, for the last couple of years, has taken a lot of steps that give them, at the very least, plausible deniability about what they're really trying to do. And I think this is another one. Really what the key is for a lot of their strategies is how much they actually get enforced. I think this one, big Chinese banks are very integrated in the global system and rarely work directly with North Korean customers, but there's a lot of ways around this. There's a lot of ways for North Korean companies to work with Chinese middlemen so that the banks are in the Chinese name.
So why doesn't the U.S., and does it through this executive order and these powers given to Secretary Mnuchin, squeeze Chinese banks further and force them to enforce these sanctions?
Yeah, so China is the world's second most powerful country, and in many areas of Asia equals the United States in power. And it's difficult. We're not in the position anymore where the United States can say, hey, listen, China, you have to do what we want you to do. The tables are very different now.
The president made that announcement today at a meeting with our allies in the region, including Japan and South Korea. He has also talked about a military option over and over again during the UN Assembly, threatening North Korea with total destruction during his speech the other day. Do you expect the leaders of Japan and South Korea support that kind of talk or get nervous?
I gotta think they get nervous from such an outrageous statement. I mean, the idea that the United States would obliterate another nation and kill millions of innocent North Korean people at the same time is, I think, really upsetting to a lot of Americans and to the leaders of South Korea and Japan as well.
At the same time, it clearly still moves towards diplomacy. And Secretary of State Rex Tillerson indicated that there's some evidence that the latest UN Security Council sanctions, which cut oil exports to North Korea, may be working. He said that there's some evidence of that. Would you expect there to be stricter oil sanctions and China to agree to that? And how long would you expect the Trump administration to allow these sanctions to actually work?
So I think it's interesting when we look at the effect of sanctions. North Korea in the 90s suffered from a horrific famine where up to 10% of the population died. The country was entirely isolated from the rest of the world, and still the regime persevered. The Kims stayed in power, and now we have North Korea today. And I just don't understand this idea that we're going to be able to force North Korea to a position worse than it was in the 90s.
And its people are still going hungry.
There's a lot of starvation.
So what you're saying is that these sanctions ultimately won't work?
I can't predict the future, but it seems that it's unlikely that this path is going to lead to what Trump wants.
What's the best case scenario here in your mind?
The best case scenario is North Korea evolves into something like Laos, a poor, fairly closed, irrelevant country.
But Laos doesn't have nuclear weapons. Laos doesn't have potentially dozens already of nuclear bombs.
And if Laos had nuclear weapons, no one would be worried because it's Laos. Mm-hmm. It's a country that is surrounded by greater powers and is fairly secure where it is. And
it's never invaded. I mean, it's never invaded South Korea.
It hasn't invaded South Korea. But I think the point with the Laos comparison is best case scenario, if we're dreaming here, is that North Korea rejoins the group of nations and becomes a responsible player and responsible stakeholder, and we don't have to worry about it.
Do you think that the Trump administration's insistence on complete disarmament is realistic with the facts on the ground? Because unlike Iran, and some people have made that comparison between a long sanctions regime leading to the Iran deal, which of course that's a whole nother discussion. Right. But North Korea is different because they already have capabilities. They already have the materials, and they might also have the missiles. So is disarmament the wrong focus?
Yes. So I think if we're saying we don't want North Korea to have the ability to launch a nuclear weapon in the United States, that's one thing. If we're saying we don't want them to be a nuclear state, that's another thing entirely. They are a nuclear state. We have to accept that. If we think that we're going to get them to lose nuclear weapons, I mean, I think they very clearly remember what happened to Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi and don't want to see the same thing happen to their leader.
Who gave up their weapons, and then there was regime change, orchestrated in part at least by the United States. Secretary Mattis is now saying there is a military option, that there is some sort of targeting of North Korea that would not entail massive civilian casualties. That's different than what he has said in the past. Do you believe that there is such an option? Other military experts have said there is no good nuclear option that wouldn't potentially put a lot of innocent lives in Seoul and a lot of American soldiers' lives at risk.
So Mattis has been very coy about what this military option is. It's certainly possible that the Pentagon has some advanced capability that would do that. I do think that we forget the lives of North Koreans as well. The country is not just the government, it's not just the regime, it's not just the military. There are many, many innocent people there. So I can't think of any military solution that wouldn't put the lives of at least millions of North Koreans in danger, not to mention South Koreans and Americans.
Many would consider the North Koreans victims of the regime as well. Does the president's views on handling North Korea appear to be shifting based on his engagement with other world leaders this week? Are you seeing any shift in strategy?
I mean, he shifts all the time, sort of like a bad weather vane, and it's really hard to know where he's standing right now. I mean, he's talking about totally destroying North Korea and then alluding to the idea that diplomacy would work, and then these sanctions. It's difficult to know who's whispering in his ear to go one way or the other, and how he feels or how he's going to feel about North Korea when he wakes up in the morning.
Isaac Stone-Fish with the Asia Society. Thanks so much, Isaac.
Thank you.